Hey everyone. So I have this article sitting here in front of me from JP Morgan back from 2020. And the question that they're posing here is it worth considering investing when the market is at all-time highs? This sounds very contrary to probably everything that you've heard of, because when it comes to investing, we're supposed to buy low and then, sell when it's high, or just let it keep going. And this article is kind of saying something different. If I scroll down to the bottom here, they took a look at some data from January 1st, 1988 through present, which happens to be August 27th of 2020 in this document. And they're showing a couple bars for each of these years. And they're saying if you invested on any other day, or any day for that matter, not any other, any day, versus investing only when the market is at an all-time high, would you make more money? And what this is starting to communicate here is that you would be better off investing when the market is at all-time highs. And you can see this on the 1 year, the 3 year, and the 5 year. This sounds really strange. So what we want to do is we want to do our own analysis and see, is this real? Is this really what you could expect? Or is this just some fancy marketing that we're dealing with here? So I'm just going to go over to Yahoo Finance and pull up this data so we can do the analysis. So at Yahoo Finance, you can see in the URL, I looked up the ticker SPY. You can just type it in here and you'll get that. And then you can come over to this historical data and then select this drop down here, select max years. We are only getting data from January 29th, 1993, because this is the SPY fund, index fund. It doesn't go back all the way to January 1st of 1988, but close enough for our analysis purposes here. And you can see I'm going out further in the future because as I'm recording this today, this is April 14th. So go ahead and set that, hit the download button, and you're going to get your data to work with. So let's go ahead and open that up in Excel. Okay, so here's our data that we're working with in Excel, and you can see that we have our trade date, and then this open, high, low, close, adjusted, close, and volume. Most of this we don't need. I'm just going to go ahead and delete it out. And now we just have the date, and then we have the close price. So what was the price of the SPY index fund on that specific date? Now, before I get too deep into this, one of the things that I like to do is I like to mock out the data, or mock out what I think the results of the data are going to be. What I see people do in the industry is that they'll get a task like this. They want to analyze the performance, and they'll just start writing SQL code. I definitely advise against doing that. I don't think that's the best practice. What that usually translates into is people writing a bunch of code. They'll end up in left field, and they'll kind of get distracted and not be working on the sort of the main thing anymore. And it happens by accident. You get some really bad code, really inefficient practices out of it. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to mock out what we think the data should look like. So what I want to do is I want to think about this output. And remember, we have this buying at the high price. And then we want to talk about buying at the any other day. So what do we want to know out of this? We have these two segments, basically, the buying at the high and then buying at any other price, but we want to get some sort of metrics. Now, the things that I think are really important are going to be this total number of purchases. This is important because we want to know if there was a lot of trades or if there were only a few trades. And then maybe the sum of total returns. I don't think I'm actually going to use this, but I'm just kind of jotting down ideas right now. I definitely want to know this average return because that's what we were seeing on the original screenshot here. I'll move this over. So this is, what JP Morgan was looking at is they're saying the average return across the period of time. Now, one of the things they didn't do is add in this median. I don't see this very often in folks' analysis out there, but you should definitely get in the habit of looking at the median or looking at percentiles because it can tell a really interesting story about the data that could be masked in the average. Remember, when you're working with an average, you can have skew. You can have these extreme outliers that are out there, and that could make these results, look good, but not actually be what you'd expect in reality. So this is sort of the thing that I want to take a look at. So one of the things that I want to do next is I want to think about the columns worth of data that we're going to need to bring into our data set. What do we want to query? What do we want the result set to look like in SQL? So one of the things that we need to know, we need to find that high price. So we have this, date and we have the close, but is this close price that we're looking at here, is this a new high or not? So I'll just say high price to date. And then since we're looking at it to date, this is going to help us track, but from whatever that high price is, like this price here is the highest price to date. This obviously isn't any, this one got higher, sorry. So we'll plug that one in. And then this is a new high, and this is a new high, and this one's a new high. But then you look at this compared to this value here, obviously it's not a new high, so we're expecting something like that to happen. And that should continue, all the way through all these records until we, get above 45. And we don't see that happen, until here. And then this becomes the new high. So this is what we're expecting to see in our data. And then based on this, what we want to do is we want to put a flag in here to say, is this a new high? And I'll just say yes, like yes, no. I'll clean this up in the database. This is just me working quickly. So in this case, you're going to get, yeses for all these areas where it's a new high. That was a new high. And then these are essentially all no's, right? So if we bring this down, that's a no, and that's a yes. That will allow us to segment our data here when we're looking at column H and I. And then the next thing that we want to know those returns, right? So we want the 1 year average performance. And then we're going to do the same thing, for your 3 year. And if we come in here, we'll have a 5 year return here as well. If I can get my keyboard to cooperate with me today. Okay, so that's roughly what we're looking at. When we get into the SQL side, you're going to see that things are going to change a little bit. I'm going to pivot around. I'm going to have some different points of view as I go. I'm going to think about some new things more than likely. But this is a really good starting point for me to work with because I know roughly what I need to do inside my code. So that's the next part that I want to talk about. So let's go over to my text editor and let's start thinking a little bit about how we want to write this code. Okay, so I opened up my text editor. I'm using Sublime Text, if you care to know on that one. You'll see me use this throughout the demo that we're doing here today. First thing I do is I come in here, I save my file off to the proper location. The name looks something like this. I say buying stocks, high price. You want to save your file, put it in the right location to start with. Just do things right to begin with. Don't try to save it in your downloads or save it in a temp folder and then come clean it up later because you probably won't clean it up later. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to do after saving this file, I'm going to add comments, this block comment to get us started. Again, this is stuff that I don't see a lot of people doing out there, but you want to be able to describe what is this file all about? What are you doing? Why are you doing what you're doing? I find that when folks don't do this and they just start writing code, one, they don't have documentation, and then they'll probably forget to do documentation at the, later on when they're done. The second issue around this is that it's really easy to not have focus because you didn't type out and explain to yourself what are you trying to accomplish in the code. So here, I went into my file. I have my instructions on what I want to be able to do for this project. Now, to get us started, the thing that I'm thinking about here is, okay, I've got this data in Excel. I got to get it in the database to analyze it. So one of the first things I need to do is I need to create some data or create a table, and I'm going to load data in the table. And then after I load data in the table, I'm going to need to determine what that high price is to date. And that's, over here in Excel, that's column C that I'm essentially doing. And then after I figure that out, I'm going to need to figure out whether or not there's a new high happening. And so that's essentially column D that we're looking at here. So I'll stub that comment out. And then after I figure out, is it a new high, we're going to have to go get the performance. But I know that I want the performance in terms of percent return. Like that's how we're describing it. But you have to remember, like, how am I going to get the percent, the percent return here that I'm working with? Well, to do that, I'm going to have to do some sort of calculation here. I'm going to have to get the stock price, because remember, we go back to the image of what we were doing. In this image, I'll blow this up a little bit for y'all. We're trying to get the performance after 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Well, our Excel, it says that we want the performance. So what are we thinking? We're thinking, like 11.7%, right? And then 39.1%. And then if I look at this other one, 71.4. So we're looking for something like that as a performance. It's a percent. But how do you get the percent? Well, we have our trade price that we're working with. But we got to go find the price 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years later. And so if I were to come into Excel, what we're really thinking about is price 1 year later. And then, then that would, give us what we're looking for. You can do the same thing, obviously. If I grab this, oops, wrong columns here. Okay. So 3 years later, price. Whoops, I did not mean to do that. Hey, live demo, right? So we could do something like that. And then here's your 5 year. And so somewhere along the lines, to get this 1 year, we'd have to scroll down. Here's 129. So we're looking for that, value in here around 129. And so this is our 1 year later price that we're working with. And so we would just do the math on this to calculate the difference between these and divide by our original price. And so this one, a year later on, if you bought the S&P or SPY stock ticker, the index, on January 29th, 93, and you held it for a year, you get an 8.96, rate of return on this. So that's something, that we're trying to achieve, and that's what we want to bake into our code. So if I go back over to our code, what we want to say first, again, break these down into small steps. We've got to go get those prices. Then after we have those prices, we can go ahead and we can make our calculation as in terms of performance. So the next thing I want to do is calculate these gains and losses for each trade date. And again, that's, the price 1 year versus price minus the price at trade. That's going to give us that delta. And then we can go ahead and do the math, and, we're going to get that performance data that we're looking for. That is our goal with this. So I'll save that in the code. And this is my roadmap for how I want to go ahead and transact, my way of working. It's a great starting point. So the next thing that I want to do, I'm going to write, as I go through this, I'm going to write my code in my editor in Sublime Text. I know a lot of folks will come over into the database and they'll start writing statements in here. I don't like to do that. If I were to come in here and do my create table statement, do something like that. I don't like this because I can't format it as well, that I don't get good alignment, all that sort of thing. And so I want those best practices whenever I'm writing. So I tend to copy back and forth. If you have a nicer editor for your database, it's all integrated, have a good IDE, kudos to you. I've just, been using Sublime Text for a long time. And this is the world I've been working in. So let's go ahead and do our create table, and let's mock out our fields. And then we'll do a decimal. That should be close enough. So there's my create table statement. Again, it's not a temp table. It's just a actual table because we want to load the data in the database. That returned. Refresh that. Let's go ahead and import our data. And so we're going to go ahead and import our data. But remember, before we import our data, this is our original file that we had, and we're building this mock. I would save this file as a different file. Save off your mock so you have it to reference later, just if you want to go back and think about it. But I'm just going to go ahead and save this data here. And that is what we're going to go ahead and import into here. So I'm going to import that. And it looks like this failed. Sometimes this happens. There's some sort of column issues, things like that, that we're looking at. And this is something that you'll frequently see. So you should know how to debug your own stuff. So this is supposed to be a CSV file. It says error, extra data after the last column. So I don't know what's going on with this. It's kind of weird, right? If you think back to our code said we wanted a date. Typically in the database, that's at 4-digit year, 2-digit month, 2-digit day format. This doesn't look like that, right? So that's my best guess. That's what's going on. This is not a standard format that you'll work with. So just do a format cells on this and customize this. Fix that up, resave over the top, come back into Postgres, and let's try the import one more time. And it looks like we have a failure there as well. So again, view the results. Something's getting, we have the format here, and then we have this value, but there's a bunch of extra columns. So what the heck's going on? Let's go take a look. So I'm just going to grab this, delete, save. Let's try that again. Boom, done. Okay, I went through that. Now, if you've been doing this for quite a while, you'd know that you could run into these things and you wouldn't do what I just did, but I wanted to show you this in a demo because these are the types of things you have to resolve pretty quickly. This is also the reason why when you get that download file, you don't really want to monkey with it. I'm over here, making a mock in the file that I want to upload, right? So this was a nice clean file to begin with. Yes, I still would have had to change the date, but I ended up playing around with these extra columns. For some reason, the CSV makes it thinks there's data in there and there's really not anymore. So, quick resolution. Okay, let's clean up this screen. All right, so now that we have that going, we have our data in here. Let's go over to the query tool. And now we can start writing some of our code. Okay, tables created. If you want, you can do just a quick check on this. And I'm just going to grab this. Now, granted, my formatting is not pretty on this, and I did a select star. Normally, I don't advise that you do that, but I know what my data set is, and I know that it's only a few thousand records. You could see that this is 7,800 records that I'm working with, and I just like to be able to scroll through that. You can drop your limit function on there if you want, but this is good enough for me to do a quick check. Okay, so with that in mind, I want to start writing more of this code here, and we've got to determine the high price to date. Now, one of the things that you're going to see me do in the code, I'm going to work with a lot of temp tables, and I'll explain why we're doing temp tables in a little bit as we go through some of this code. If you're not using them, you're moving too slow. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to get my data from this, this data set, just like we did, but I want to be explicit about it. So instead of select star, let's grab to this, and this is how I write to. So here's our stock data, and you'll see that I started off with select and then from, and then I said the table name. I always do that first before I go writing the fields. Then I always make sure I have an alias on this. So I have my trade date, and I can say close price that I'm having here, fix that formatting, and we'll drop down. And then I'll put this semicolon at the end of it. So now I have really clean code. That's how I always work. I know what I'm getting, those two fields. Now I need one more field, right? I need this high price. And so what do I want to call this? I think I'm going to call this max close price to date. And this is going to be that highest price to date that we're working with if I jump back over to Excel here. And the question is, okay, how am I going to get this value? I have to look over all of this data, and I've got to work that history. And actually, let me go back to, okay, so let me go back to this mock for you real quick so you can see what I mean. So we have that trade price. We need to get this column here, but how do we do that? We have to essentially look at the, we're looking at the current row to see, is this a new high? And we've got to compare to all of the other values that are coming prior to that. So what does that sound like? Sounds like a window function, because it is a window function. And that's going to be the easiest way to do this. So what are we looking for? We're going to look for that max, our max close price. And then this is a window function. So we're going to do this over the entire data set. There's no partitions in our data set. And we need to, so no partitions. So we're going to go to the order by. So how do we want to sort our data? And then based on that sorting, we'll look at what's going on here in our data, because we don't want all of the data that we're looking at. So trade date is what we have here. And I'm going to go ahead and carriage return this because I want this to look nice. So we'll do order by, but then we need to figure out which rows do we want to look at, because we don't want to look at all rows. We need to bound this, and we're trying to look at this row and everything else here. So that's simple enough. So we'll do that. And that is our code for that. So that should give us what we're looking for this first part. And to make life easier on me when I go to read this, let's just do this order by in here. And we'll do that in ascending order. So that's my code. Let's go back over into let's go back over into our editor, and you see that I'll copy stuff over here, and oh look, human errors, right? Spelling mistake. So rerun that, get that, and then what I'll do, because I'm copy pasting, I just copy paste back and forth a lot. I know this. If you've got a nice IDE, you wouldn't have to do this, but this is just the practice that I do. I don't want to, accidentally, I generally don't change things in here. I generally come over to my code, would make the change here and copy back and forth. Okay, now that we have our code here, we can take a look and see if this data makes sense. So we want to do a really quick QA check on our data. So you can see here on this first row, 43.94, and the max price is that. That makes perfect sense. There was no prices, no records before that. This became a new high, so we're showing it. We get down to that 45. Again, each one of these here is a new high. We get to 45, again, new high, but then we don't have any new highs going forth. And so we see 45 being displayed. And then we get down to row 23, and it's a 45.13, and you can see the new highs getting there. So our window function works. This is the right way to write the code. So all good, no bugs. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do, since I'm probably going to use this new data set, right? I don't want to be running this query all the time, so I want to put it into a temp table. And I'm going to go ahead and call this temp table trades to date with high price, and we'll do that. I'll close this off. Another thing that I want to do if I'm creating a temp table, good practice, I'll do drop table. If I can spell right, table. We'll do drop table if exists. What that is doing is it's saying, as I run this code, for example, I'll show you how this works and we'll explain it. So I run this. Well, what if I run it again? I'm going to get this error here, and that's because the table already exists. So if I put in that drop statement up top like that, I run this, you can see because the table existed, it drops it if it exists, and then it creates. And then if I run this whole thing again, it's always going to do that. If I just did this drop table, you can see it's dropped, And then it's just, if I keep running this, you just get a notice that it's skipping this because the table doesn't exist. So you're not going to get those runtime errors. So this is just a good practice. Put it in place. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about why I used a temp table here and I didn't use a CTE. I mean, if you wanted, you could come in and you could create a CTE. So you need to remember what a CTE is. A CTE is going to stay in duration for runtime, but a temp table stays in duration, like the results stay in memory for the entire session, so your database connection. So if you think about this, we created, let's make sure I created this. We'll just run this piece of code here, right? You can keep running this piece of code over and over again without running this first part. But if I come in here, let me drop the table and let me change this to a CTE, same thing, and we'll remove that. I'll just clear that out so it doesn't confuse anybody. When you run this, if I run the whole thing, I get the results. And if I come back and I want to rerun that, I get an error because this doesn't exist. This is only in memory when you run the entire query. When you think about what we're about to write here, we're going to have a lot of code. And if I start using or creating these CTEs and they're really expensive, meaning they're really time consuming, they have a long runtime, that is going to just hit the database over and over again, and it's going to make me work slower. You know, use a temp table and you'll see how much faster things go. That will become more evident as I go through this, but just something to keep in mind as we're going through the code. All right, let's get that out of there. Okay, so I'm going to set this back up, make sure I have it there, delete that out. Okay, so now, and let's take our data. So I'll just do this, you know, again, this is about the only time you'll see me use select star. I'd use a limit function if I needed to, but it's not a big deal in this case. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do here is I want to look at each record and compare the high price to date versus the current price, and then I want to tag that data. So I want another column to get displayed here, but I'm not trying to save this off into the same table. We're not altering the table. We're just working inside of our temp tables right now. So what I want to do here is I want to create a new temp table that we're going to work with. So again, let's say create temp table. And what should I call this one? Let's call it something like this. Why not? All right, so I've got that. And again, best practices. We'll drop the table if it exists. And now we can go ahead and start writing our code. Well, oops, and clean this up. So we've got that cleaned up. All right, and I want to go ahead and I'm going to grab this because it's going to be the same format as we had before, and then we'll have our table that we're drawing from. We want to query this table because we're going to build on top of it. I'm going to go ahead and call this T for trades. Should probably change these here too. And there. Okay, and then we have one more field that we're returning. And we'll mark that T as well. So this is what we're going to bring back. You can double check your code on the fly if you want. Make sure that works. That works. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do here is we want to figure out this flag. So essentially what we're going to put in here is this is new high YN. I'm doing that for yes, no. Whoops. And this is the field that I want to create. So the question is, how am I going to get this value? So what I need to do here is I need to compare this to something. If I go back and I think about my data, what am I comparing to? When I see this 45 here on row 5, this is a new high. And how do I know that it's a new high, right? Like this is telling me the max price to date, but how do I know that 45 is a new high? Well, if this is a running list of the greatest high that we've ever seen, then you'd have to compare where we're at 45 to the previous one. If it's not equal to the previous date, the previous high, then it must be a new high, right? If we take line 6 here and we look at it and it says it's 45, we compare it to the previous was 45, so this is not going to be a new high, right? So you'd get a yes value up here and a no value down here on record number 6 because it did not make a new high. So I've got to find the previous high. That's going to be really important. And then based on getting that value of the previous high, I'm going to have to do this calculation. So let's think a little bit about how I might be able to do that. If you think about what I just described here, what I'm talking about is a lag function. We want to lag, we want to see the previous thing. So again, another window function that we want to work with. So in this case, we could just say lag, and what do we want to lag over? Well, we want to get this previous price to date. And we'll order by our trade date. And I should probably call this previous max close price to date. Previous day. How would we call that? Previous day max close price to date. I think that sounds good. So we want to do that. And then we want to do some sort of calculation down here to figure out, is this, does this price equal this price? And the way that we want to be able to do that is we're going to do some sort of math or a case statement on this. So let's say case when, we'll open this up, the max value here equals our previous that we had here. Then we'll say, and no, because if it's equal, it's not a new value there, or sorry, it's not a new high. And then else, we'll say yes, and end. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. Now, the issue here that we're going to run into is this is being, aliased. It's this calculation, but it's being done within the same query. So we can't really use this just yet here. You could take this lag and you can embed it in here, and you're duplicating code, and I don't like doing that. So let's just make another temp table out of the whole thing. That's probably the best way to go. It's pretty cheap to do that. And again, we'll grab this. And we should comment in this. All right, so there's my comment. And I think it looks good. Okay, so now when we think about the code, we'll kind of refactor this a little bit. I'm going to grab all this, pull it up into here. Again, we can't do this section just yet. So we're just going to do this, this lag function on here. And I think we're pretty good there. I don't see any bugs necessarily. Again, I'm going to come in here. Let's just order by, oops, change that to T because our table's T. And now we can run this piece of code. Let's see if this works. Okay, cool. So now when we look at this code, we're getting this previous day max close price to date. And as you'd expect on record number 1, there is no previous price. So it's a null value. And then we get into record number 2, and we're seeing that this did lag. So this number is the previous close, and all we're doing is transposing it over to this column. So now we can make some sort of comparison in our code. So we have that. That's our first chunk of code. And since we created that CTE, let's swap that out. So this is the trades with the previous day price. We did that up above. And this value, just double checking to make sure that we got that correctly. And again, I'm just going to pull this order by in here real quickly. Okay. So now let's go, actually, if my mouse will cooperate here. Let's grab this. There's that CTE, or sorry, temp table ran properly. Let's just grab the code. Boom. We got the data out of this. One thing that I want to do though, I want to pull this up into my result set. Sometimes I might want to look at that data because I want to make sure that flag is working properly. So this one here, we know that these are all new highs, and you can see here that we get a no value on line 6, which was expected because, again, you know, the previous high was 45. We got 45 again, and this is telling us the previous day. So again, line 5 got pulled down into here. 45 is the previous high. This equals this. It's not a new high. We're getting a no flag. And that continues till we get down here. The previous high for this record, the previous day's high is 45. It's been transposed over here. We get a yes. Code looks good. Okay, so let me go ahead and run that one as well for our temp table. So we have that sitting there in memory. So now we're good.